if they were different, my life could be better. If they didn't require these things, my life would be better. Why are they so strict or whatever? Which may be true. I mean, all those things may be true. I'm not saying that they're false, but that perspective is disempowering. And it's much more empowering to have the perspective of, okay, that's the way they are. I see. What do I need to do to get to my goal, given the fact that that's the way they are?
Yes.
So it's sort of like the analogy I try to give maybe is like you're playing one of these games, these quest games, okay, where you have to run around, complete a mission, and you encounter some troll who is not letting you cross the bridge. You don't think to yourself, this troll, possible. Why is this troll not letting me cross the bridge? You think, oh, that's part of the game. That's what's written into the game. The creators wrote that in. Or find the piece of gold that he wants and give it to him, and then he'll let me cross the bridge. So you just find out the people who you can start thinking that they're blocking you from getting what you want. Just think of, well, what do I need to give them to let them,
move on.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for coming on the show today. Really appreciate you showing up. And thank you for being the first guest from Jamaica. So definitely representing for your island.
Hi, Mark. How are you doing? Yeah, good to be here. I watched a few of the podcasts and I'm excited to share.
Fantastic. So can you tell us where you live currently and a bit about what you're working on at the moment?
Absolutely. I live in South Florida right now with my wife and 4 kids. I am working at Nvidia and working on a number of different projects, including teleconferencing, video conferencing of the future, perhaps with avatars. And also, I'm interested in VR, AR. I want to get them to build a robot that allows you to do VR, AR remotely, like, teleport to a new location. So
interesting. All right. And are you involved with the eye gazing project at Nvidia as well?
Project Maxine. You're talking about Project Maxine.
I believe so, yes.
Not really. I mean, I know that team. I interact with them, but I haven't contributed to that project. It's a great project. I think it's going to have a big impact. So
great. So why did you choose to work at Nvidia?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, probably other than the pay, right?
Right. The pay was good. I was working at Magic Leap.
That's a serious company as well.
Yeah, Magic Leap is pretty serious. A good company. I loved it. They're doing some cool stuff. Very interesting work. And so that's where I was for the last sort of 2 years since 2018. I was there for 2 years. Then about a year ago, they ran into some financial difficulties. Because of the pandemic, it was tough to raise money. They're still a startup technically, even though they're quite big. So they don't really have enough money coming in, enough revenue to support themselves. And they had to lay off some people, and things were changing. Things were changing at Magic Leap, and I thought it was a good time to look around. I did some interviews with companies like Apple, Facebook, and so on. Nvidia wasn't on the radar. I didn't really consider Nvidia a place that I would work. But then a recruiter called me and said, actually, the day I was going to sign an offer from Apple, the recruiter called me and said, hey, we want you to come work for NVIDIA. And so I looked at what NVIDIA was doing. I talked to some people at NVIDIA and realized they're much more interesting company than I had imagined. I thought they were just a gaming card manufacturer, right? Yeah, you get graphics cards for your games. That's it. But no, they're doing some incredible stuff with AI. They're very strategic, very future looking. I talked to Jensen during that process. And,
wow.
Yeah, and it was clear after talking to him that he has a vision for what NVIDIA can do that's much bigger than what I thought they were capable of. And so I started going back and looking at some of the keynotes, and I realized they're really poised to sort of take over the world.
Yes.
With their strategy, Nvidia should become, unless something changes, should become the primary provider of computation in the world. Okay, with their GPUs, with their acquisition of ARM,
Mm-hmm.
Mellanox, put those together, they can provide the best data centers and the cheapest compute. So anybody who uses any kind of compute, your smartphone is doing anything in the cloud, in the future, it's going to be primarily provided by Nvidia, I believe. So,
and that's quite cool that, I feel extremely fortunate to work at Nvidia and just see how much progress they're making and that type of vision that they have. So, glad we're both there.
Yeah, me too.
So we do the show to encourage people from the Caribbean region, especially, to pursue data-driven careers. So can you share with us your view of how you think machine learning, AI, and even more broadly tech, because I believe that you need to have a good, thriving tech ecosystem before you hop into machine learning, and those data-driven careers can play a role in the Caribbean's future?
Sure. It used to be the case that if you wanted to work in tech, you had to go to Silicon Valley. That was the place to be. And Silicon Valley used to be a place that made silicon, like they actually made chips. Some of those original companies, that's what they did. And they made the hardware chips that technology ran on. They were slowly replaced by software companies primarily. Google, Facebook, Apple is sort of a mix. Amazon is potentially a mix too. Microsoft is not really Silicon Valley, but it's one of the big ones. And when that happened, I was surprised that tech didn't just lose a centralized location. You would think with software, there's no reason to have a physical location where everybody has to come together and work. I suppose the hardware, you're building stuff, you got to have hands-on. And it took a pandemic, I think, for people to realize that you don't really need this centralized location.
Yes.
It's just as easy for me. I live in Florida. I just need a computer, good internet connection, maybe some equipment, and I can do work that way. And all my interactions are remote, with my colleagues. And there's no reason why that couldn't expand internationally. So if you're in the Caribbean and you know how to code or are willing to learn, you can do anything that someone in America can do, that someone in California can do. You could work for a company, one of these large companies if you wanted, or you can do your own thing and you can have a big impact. Software has this multiplicative capability that we've never seen before in the world. It's, I write one block of software and I'm in an open source project. I commit that, it goes into the repo. Now everybody starts from there and can build on top of that. And someone else makes a small contribution that moves everybody forward. And so if you can get involved in some of these projects, some of these open source projects, you can really, really make a big impact. And so I believe tech in general can be huge in the Caribbean. And it's really sort of only limited by history, meaning people there haven't seen it, they haven't experienced it, they haven't lived it. They don't have many examples to say, oh, here's someone who maybe lives in Jamaica. We've seen some examples of people who left Jamaica or left the Caribbean and were successful, but there are not that many examples of people who live there and are able to turn turn their technical prowess into success.
Yes.
But there's no fundamental reason why that can't happen. It's just no one has done it. It's kind of like the 4-minute mile, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And the moment that it comes through, you'll just see many more examples sort of show up, right?
Exactly. And the only reason you didn't have those many examples before is that people are like, no, that's not possible. I'm not even going to try. But then once you see one, then you go for it. So I encourage you to not wait for that one, or maybe to be that one. If you're watching this podcast, there's no reason why you couldn't. There's no fundamental reason why you have to sit on the sidelines
and wait.
Yeah, and wait. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling that out because I do think we have an advantage in the Caribbean geographically in terms of time zone, ability to speak English very well.
Yes.
All of those things, and that multiculturalism to interface with many people from many different races, I think is a strong point there.
Yes, I mean that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. The other hubs where tech is big would be like China, India. We've kind of accepted that, there's some really good talent over there. But yeah, they have severe disadvantages compared to the Caribbean. South America is kind of like the same time zone, but there's a language barrier. So there was really, the Caribbean is really poised to take over, and yeah, I want to see it happen.
Yeah, I'm excited to hopefully your journey will inspire some other folks from home and even in the diaspora who don't live at home to even push for even more success. So in the first segment, we're going to dive into your career journey, and you have 3 degrees from MIT, right? That's the big boy school. And you've been a senior and a principal engineer at some top companies like Google, Magic Leap, and now Nvidia, which to me is crazy impressive. So super excited to learn. So let's begin at the start. Tell us what you're like when you're growing up at home, what you're like in high school. And what's really interesting is I want to know, were you super studious? What were your strengths and weaknesses? And I like to see maybe people kept the path or did a big shift,
Right. So I was born and raised in Jamaica. My dad was Jamaican, but my mom was from Trinidad.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so she's I think super smart. She is maybe the brains of the family, and so we had 2 brothers, so it's 3 boys, and we kind of grew up. She helped us with our education, and the educational system in Jamaica I think is great. We all 3 of us benefited from that, but I would say my particular personality was not well suited for that kind of system. It's sort of British based a little bit, and compared to the American system, it's maybe a little bit more focused on discipline and on hard work, as opposed to maybe creativity and out of the box thinking, which is kind of one of my strengths. So I was not a good student. Certainly, I was not as good of a student as my older brother, who was really focused and could do the work and study and do well. However, I still managed to do fairly well in school, with the help of my siblings and my mom and my dad to some extent. And there was a couple of key moments. One of them was there was someone by the name of Dennis Minot in Jamaica who has kind of spearheaded a lot of this idea that, hey, Jamaica is full of really gifted students, and we don't do a good job in the educational system of identifying them and encouraging their gifts. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's more stifling. They usually get stifled more than encouraged.
Wow.
Just because of the nature of the system. And so he, of course, my parents encouraged them to get me tested, and I was shown that I was sort of smarter than my age should have predicted. And really, with his encouragement, for example, he encouraged me to do the SATs, and he had a little class where he taught people how to do this, and spoke about the American universities and how great they are. And my older brother and I both went to his classes, and because of his encouragement, applied to American colleges and got in. And I think without him, I don't think I would have necessarily done that. But I think I needed to. I'm not sure how I would have done going to UE. UE is a great school. I mean, I'm nothing against you. I taught there for 2 years. Or we have another one in Jamaica. At the time it was called CAST, or it's now called UTEC. And I think there's even more that have popped up since I left. But I think I needed to go away to study to America and
to see something different, right, and get a different perspective as well, right?
Different perspective, exactly. And that combination worked well. That combination of the rigor in the high school years from the British system, and then going to a school like MIT, it gave me an advantage, I think, against my peers who came from American schools, which were, they weren't bad schools. They were great. Mm-hmm. But I think it certainly, I was certainly on par and able to compete with them.
Wow.
So that worked well. I forgot what the point of this, or what I was saying is.
No, so I'm happy that you kind of brought up the fact that you were not the best student, quote unquote, by the system.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's very important to highlight, because I think if people look at your resume and they see MIT, they see Google, and they're like, oh yeah, Andrew he was beating book in high school and all this type of stuff, but not necessarily knowing that was not your most preferred way of learning. And
yes, so I went to one of the top high schools in Kingston called Campion College, and I was doing lower six there. Mm-hmm. One of my subjects was art, because they did not have a subject I wanted to do, which was further math. They had a philosophy that if they offer further math, not enough people are going to get A's, and they want to keep their grades.
Oh, that sucks.
I know, yeah. I don't know if that's still their philosophy, but so they didn't even offer it as a subject. And so I was doing art, which I liked art, but somehow me and the teacher didn't get along. I didn't do any of the homeworks, and I was failing. And my parents decided, we talked to the principal there, and my parents decided to move me to a different school. So I went to Munro College, which was a boarding school in the rural part of Jamaica. And it was through some close personal family friends. That's how we knew about the school and were able to get in and get transferred in sort of, after I had done like half a year in lower six. And so that was, whether you want to call it divine providence or just luck or whatever it was, if that didn't happen, I don't think I would have made it to MIT, for example.
Yes.
My grades at Campion, like I said, I was failing one subject. The other two were fine, but when I went to this new school, Munro, the teachers all thought I was good because they didn't really know that I didn't do my homework and stuff like that. So they had a good impression of me. They were able to write me good recommendation letters.
Okay.
And then after they sent off those recommendation letters, then they realized, wait a second, this kid is a slacker. And one of the teachers, actually my further math teacher, kicked me out of his class.
No way.
Yeah, he said,
I would never have thought that.
Yeah, it was just weird. It's a boarding school. So I didn't have anywhere to go. But he said, don't come back to class until I do all the homework that I've missed. Mm-hmm. Which was the best thing that could have happened to me, I think. It forced me to sit down and do the homework. I mean,
it wasn't for lack of ability. It was just you could care less, right? To some degree.
Care less. Like, I know that stuff. I don't need to do it. But he forced me to do it. And if I didn't do it, I don't think I would have gotten the A in that course. So that's further maths. And that's how I kind of landed at MIT. I think that was a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. So you end up at MIT now. So you leave home from Jamaica,
Yeah.
and you land there and you're with the best of the best in the world, as they say.
Yeah.
And tell us about that experience. Is it true what you sort of hear about MIT when it comes to everyone's super sharp, everyone's crazy hardworking? What was your experience like?
It wasn't so much that people were crazy hardworking. I mean, there were some people who worked crazy amounts, more than me, certainly.
Yes.
But what was comforting at MIT is I felt a little bit more at home, meaning I was sort of a nerd.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little bit I wasn't one of the cool kids, certainly in school.
Okay.
They were the cool people, their parents were rich and their parents drove the best cars and they're popular and attractive, and you knew who those were. I wasn't one of them. I was sort of a nerd. But at MIT, almost everyone there had that same experience. I was a nerd. And so it was cool to be among people who didn't make fun of nerds. In fact, they were proud to be nerds.
Yes.
That was kind of one of the mottos. We had a pin that said nerd pride. And we,
okay.
we're proud to be nerds and to be into things like math and calculus in our spare time and stuff like that. And that was really, really great for me. Just that environment, got to meet some good friends. I had that undergrad experience. Again, wasn't necessarily the best student in my undergrad days. I remember, again, there was a class that I didn't do the homework in, but I did well in the tests. Like I did like a B. I could get a B based on my test scores. But when I got my report card, I'd been given an F. I called the professor and I was like, what's going on here? Why are you giving me an F? And he said, well, in the first class, he told everybody that the homework is mandatory. If you don't do the homework, you can't pass the class. I said, oh, yeah, I remember you said that, but come on. I mean, let me do the homework over the summer. Let me turn it in. And he was like, well, was there some special circumstance why you didn't do it? Were you sick or something? I said, no. And he said, okay, well, you have an F.
Wow.
And this was a required course for my major. So I eventually had to realize that it wasn't the system fighting against me. He wasn't punishing me. And that was what I felt at first. Like, I was so mad at this professor. But rather, these are the rules. If I wanted to pass that course, I had to do the homework. And it changed my perspective. It's one of my life lessons.
That was the benchmark, essentially, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you do this. These are the rules of the game. You do this to get this. If you don't do this, you don't get this. I mean, that's it. It's not a secret.
Yes.
And viewing the world in terms of they're against me can be discouraging. And I recommend don't do that.
And do you find that attitude sort of manifests itself in people who maybe see things a little differently? The system, let's call it the system, they don't fit as well as you're saying, and like things are maybe bored, especially in school. For me, I could care less about school my entire school career. So I'm very happy that I'm not the only one who was a quote unquote slacker in school. I would just say you're a higher level slacker than I was to some degree. And yeah, so do you think that attitude manifests itself in people who just see things differently, and that's a challenge that you tend to have to overcome at some point?
Which attitude? You mean the one about?
Just the system is against me, and screw this.
Yeah, I see it. I guess where I see it coming up now is now I'm a parent of 3 teenage kids and then one toddler. For some reason, I see them having that sort of attitude, like thinking that my parents are so unfair. They want me to do this and that, and that guy's parents aren't like that. but then that's disempowering. So that takes the responsibility and puts it in the hands of somebody else. If they were different, my life could be better. If they didn't require these things, my life would be better. Why are they so strict or whatever?
Wow.
Which may be true. I mean, all those things may be true. I'm not saying that they're false, but that perspective is disempowering. And it's much more empowering to have the perspective of, okay, that's the way they are. I see. What do I need to do to get to my goal, given the fact that that's the way they are?
Yes.
So sort of like the analogy I try to give maybe is like you're playing one of these games, these quest games, okay, where you have to run around and complete a mission, and you encounter some troll who is not letting you cross the bridge. You don't think to yourself, this troll, impossible. Why is this troll not letting me cross the bridge? You think, oh, that's part of the game. That's just written into the game. The creators wrote that in. I have to find the spell to use on the troll, and or find the piece of gold that he wants and give it to him, and then he'll let me cross the bridge. So you just find out the people who you, instead of thinking that they're blocking you from getting what you want, just think of, well, what do I need to give them to let them,
move on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that could be your parents, that could be your teachers, system, whatever it is. So
yeah, I think without you knowing, you probably surfaced the first piece of advice. I don't know if you kept it in or you had it there, And I think that's actually quite important for this newer generation who will experience things very differently to maybe when we went to school, and they'll see many more examples of people so-called bucking the system. So I think it'll be an interesting one to manage. So I wanted to ask about tell us about the affinity for electrical engineering, and I believe it was electrical engineering and computer science. Why did you sort of do both versus, let's say, doing one? Or is that an MIT thing?
That's an MIT thing, yeah.
Okay.
Electrical engineering and computer science is the name of the department. So really, I studied more electrical engineering. But my degree has computer science on there. And I had to take a few computer science courses, but I would not call myself necessarily a computer scientist.
Understood.
Yes. Now, why did I maybe go on to study that in grad school? In fact, why did I do grad school? That's an interesting.
Yeah, that's well. So funny quick aside. I interviewed a gentleman named Dr. Kokaram. So he's at Trinity College Dublin, and I usually make the statement that people who do PhDs are crazy, and he said no, they're actually just weird, and he has one as well. So I kind of wanted to bring that up as a funny aside. So
yes, I know Anil quite well. Me and him worked together when
I was at
Google. Yeah, he was at YouTube at the time.
Wow,
and
small world, man.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah, it was Trini, so I immediately it's like, hey, Trini accent, okay. Good guy.
So yes, grad school. Tell us about why you did it, and yeah, what do you think about it now?
All right, I'll just tell you how I sort of stumbled into it. Similarly to how I stumbled into, changing high schools, which kind of helped me, I think, get into MIT. I stumbled into it in the following way. I'd taken a class with a professor named Al Oppenheim at MIT, and I didn't do very well in his class. I hardly did the problem sets, what we call homework. And I remember I thought I was going to fail the class, and so I went to his office hours. So these are office hours. He holds them every week. People come with questions. They're struggling with material, and I've never gone to one of those before. But I went to this one, and he thought, oh, okay, I haven't seen before. Maybe he needs some help with some of the material. I asked him, well, what does he think? Should I drop the course? Am I going to fail? Because if I'm going to fail, I just want to drop it so it doesn't show up on my GPA, And of course, he was a little annoyed. That's why I was there. But he opened the thing, he looked at my grades and said, "Hey, tell you what, Andrew, if you ace the final, if you ace the final, you can get an A on the course still."
Wow.
I'm like, "Oh, really?" And he says, "Yeah, if you ace the final, you can get an A on the course." So I didn't drop it. I, tried to maybe catch up a little bit. I did the final, and I ended up getting a B in the course, which
Oh.
was my highest grade that semester. I had a B and I think 3 C's.
Okay. Okay.
Now, I should tell you that I was an undergrad. I was hardly doing the work. I was staying up late with friends. We were just chatting. We would just like play games. We would watch movies, and I had so much freedom. I didn't really have this before, and it was just like friends were so. It was just so important to me to interact with friends,
Mm-hmm.
and um, I wasn't eating well. I wasn't sleeping well. I was undergrad. I wasn't doing my laundry, so I would just like pull out dirty clothes out of the bin to try to put them on. Uh,
You
it
live
was
a
a mess.
life.
Yeah, it was a mess, and it showed. It reflected in the
In your
output
academic performance.
in my performance. Right? Yeah. Then MIT has this thing where you can do one extra year to get a master's degree. So I thought that's a great
Mm-hmm.
idea.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had a girlfriend from like high school days, and she was doing law school in, Jamaica and in Barbados, at UE in Barbados, and she was graduating right at sort of the time when the end of my 4 years, and I didn't want to lose her,
Mm-hmm.
and so I asked her to marry me. We got married at the end of the 4 years, and so my fifth year, that extra 1 year when I was doing the master's degree, I was now living in married student housing. So I
Interesting.
wasn't in the undergrad dorm anymore. Me and my friends weren't staying up late. I was just there with her, and I was sleeping better.
Mm-hmm.
I was eating better. Okay, I was doing my homework because I'd come home and would hang out, and then I'd have all this time. I was like, "Oh, I'll do all the homework." And I did the homework, um, and I took another class from that same professor who had seen me before, and I got like an A plus. The class project at the end that you're supposed to like see who can get the biggest whatever signal processing thing. I
Mm-hmm.
I beat the TAs by like a factor of 100.
What?
And,
Okay.
and
So
so I
that
did
caught his
really well.
attention.
Yeah, caught his attention. And then he remembered me from the class. He's like, "Weren't you the kid that came? I was trying to drop the class, and at the time you had like purple hair and orange hair." And I was like, "Yeah, that was me. That was me." And he asked me, "Well, what changed?" And I thought about it a second. I said, "Well, Wendy,
Mm-hmm.
who's my wife. I mean, it's like a circumstantial change, and
Yeah.
that made a big difference in my grades." And he was like, "Okay, all right, good to know." And he asked me, "So, are you applying for the PhD program?"
Hmm.
And I said, "No, wasn't planning to." Oh no, he asked me if I'm going to do the test. There was a PhD test called the preliminary written exam that all the grad students need to do when they come in. I was like, test is coming up next week. Are you going to do it? I was like, "No, I wasn't planning to apply to a PhD program." He said, "You should. You should do the test." And of course, he's one of the most respected professors
Mm-hmm.
at MIT. And so if he says I should do it, and I was like, "Okay, I'll do it." And of course, I knew he would write me a good recommendation. So I
Right,
applied
right.
and got in, and he was my thesis supervisor. So
That's pretty cool. So you went from a slacker student and the professor saw you and you cleaned up and then he gave you a shot, it seems like.
yeah, but here's the question: why didn't I just do that myself?
Hmm.
Like, why didn't I just start doing the homeworks and um, like getting sleep and eating well and attending the lectures awake? instead of falling asleep in the back. Those are all things I could have done. Those are not difficult things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why do you think you weren't able to do it? Or what would you tell yourself, looking back now?
I didn't know what I had. I didn't know how important like this college experience was. I didn't know that it was a great opportunity to learn. I should take advantage of it. I didn't know it was costing so much money, and I just was like, I was clueless,
Unaware. Yeah.
unaware, immature, maybe.
Sure. And that's undergrad, I guess, to some degree. And so now you've entered your PhD, and you're with one of the most respected professors at MIT. Tell us about that experience, and how did your discipline change in this new leg of the journey?
Yeah, that was a good experience. It was certainly fun to work for him. The research was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of trying to come up with something new that no one has ever thought of, or no one's ever thought of that way, and finding those nuggets was very interesting. This professor was also just very much into this idea of like creativity, promoting creativity. He started a little group that met once a week where we were discussing creativity and how to promote and encourage creativity.
Okay.
Creative thinking. He shared that he would do meditation to help his creativity. Someone else shared that, well, they would, like comedy is kind of how they got creativity. We had people of different religions in the group. It was really quite interesting. And so, like, for example, one of these groups, one of the problems in my thesis, I had this idea, this solution, but we had no idea what it would solve, like what problem it would solve. And we're in these creative brainstorming meetings, someone was able to say, hey, what about this problem over here? The missing pixel problem, this could be used. I was like, great. And so that last key piece of my thesis came from just one of those brainstorming meetings. And that became sort of one of my favorite things to do in life, really, in my career, is to get people together who are creative, help them to get over the stigma of saying stupid things, and brainstorm, come up with ideas, and feed off each other. Have the ideas feed off each other to come up with like things that you could never, like one person wouldn't be able to come up with, but like 3 or 4 people together, each bringing a piece of it to come up with. So,
that's a very interesting concept, because I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of school. So, for instance, the way that you are trained in, I would say, both American and formal British education, it's very singular. You're by yourself. You're repeating the same exact thing, or you're receiving the same exact thing as everyone else, and you're not necessarily encouraged, like you're saying, to come together as a group and maybe brainstorm. Maybe in some projects, but at the end of it, it is always so constrained that you end up coming back to the same thoughts that everyone else would have sort of generated. What do you think the opportunity is there for, not necessarily in school, we can't change the education system, but for people outside, especially younger people in school, in high school, who get very bored at school, to participate in those things?
I think this is something that we should encourage from early, early school, high school, because I think that creativity, this ability to create and see new connections, like peaks in those early years.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And I think really like encouraging that, harnessing that, and it doesn't have to be through some sort of academic exercise.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think really got me into problem solving was when I was a kid, we used to work on puzzles.
Right.
So So my family had a subscription to this magazine that had puzzles, and the puzzles were always kind of different, interesting crossword puzzles or math puzzles or logic puzzles, and we would, my brothers and I would try to solve these. And there was this like, especially in a group, you're working this tough problem in a group, and someone says something like, "Aha, that leads to this," and "Ah," and then you've all of a sudden together you've conquered this puzzle, and you have this eureka moment, which gives you that sort of pleasure. And that's what got me into, like, I think research. Some of these like invention and innovation that we do in some of these companies came from some of that. So
great. And what are, as we sort of tie off on the PhD thread, what advice would you give to people in high school or in their undergrad or in their masters thinking about pursuing a PhD, be it at a top school like MIT or not? What are things that they should keep in mind to have the best journey there?
I used to be unsure. Shortly after I got my PhD, I joined Texas Instruments, and I was kind of looking at where I was in my career versus others who didn't do a PhD. Maybe they just did a master's degree and then they started working. So while I was doing my PhD for 4 years, they were working for 4 years and getting raises and promotions along the way.
Right.
So I came in sort of junior, but same age as people who had more experience, but I had a PhD, and I didn't really see advantages at the time, especially like looking at salary. You don't necessarily have a salary advantage
early on, at least, right?
Early on, because they have been having these raises for the last 4 years, right? But then certainly as my career has progressed, I would say the PhD really did help me. So there's certain fields where if you do a PhD, pretty much the only thing you can do is teach or become an academic or become a scholar. But engineering is not like that. Engineering, you can do a PhD and then you can go work and you can do very well. You can do very advanced things in some of these companies. You can work for Apples of the world and build really cool and interesting things that haven't existed before. And I would say if you can do a PhD, yeah, you should do it. And if you think you can't, then you probably are wrong. You probably can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always say the smartest people don't finish the PhDs. The hardest working ones tend to.
Yeah, I think that's when I appreciated the benefit of hard work. Was to be able to get that. Yeah.
Great. And so you taught at UE on Mona campus. So tell us about that experience and, maybe what you hope, maybe it's not necessarily changed by now, but what would you want students maybe at that university, if this gets there, to pay attention to?
Okay. I'll tell you the story and maybe we can kind of weave through if anything seems interesting. So part of my undergrad was paid for by a scholarship that I gotten through something called the OAS, Organization of American States, I believe. And it required me to return to my country of origin to work for at least 2 years was
stipulation.
Part of the deal. Yeah, that was stipulation, right? And so I knew that after graduating, after I got a PhD, I'll go back to Jamaica. My wife was the daughter of the campus registrar at UE Mona, actually. So I was, that's not why I was able to teach there, but he helped me. So certainly nice to see a familiar face.
Yes.
Father-in-law.
I'm sure it wasn't hard with a PhD from MIT as well.
Right. Yeah. So I was able to go there. We didn't really, with an engineering degree, you'd think I would be in the School of Engineering, which would be in St. Augustine, Trinidad. But according to my scholarship, really I had to be in Jamaica. So
I see.
I ended up teaching in the physics department there in a sort of a subsection called electronics, which had some electrical engineering pieces, but wasn't a full engineering degree. And when we were moving back to Jamaica, we thought, you know what? We're going to be there for like 10 years. We're going to try to give it 10 years to help really change the country. We have this education, this experience. We've been exposed to the top, the top of the top, the MIT Nobel Prize winners, and we've learned so much. We felt like we learned so much that we could really contribute to help develop the country.
Absolutely.
After about a year, we shortened that to 5 years, and then after about another half a year, we shortened that to 2 years. And we said, oh, giving up. And why was that? I realized that the people there were not as excited necessarily as I was. Like I thought they would welcome me with open arms. Oh, Andrew, you've returned from MIT. Come and teach us everything you know so that we can use some of what you've learned and we can incorporate it into our systems and make them better. But it was not like that. And of course, I was a little naive. It was more like, they were like, well, who are you? I've been here slaving away, building up the country. You can't just come in here and take over.
I see.
That was more the attitude that we encountered. And
that's challenging.
Yeah.
Very challenging.
That was somewhat challenging. And then dealing with the crime, there were some crime was rampant in Jamaica at the time. And my wife and I said, well, I don't know how long it would take for us to get, in Jamaica, the seniority is very important. They respect age, experience, and being young. We just didn't see how we were going to
have influence.
Have that influence, right? And so the opportunity came up that we could go back to Texas Instruments.
Yeah.
And we did.
Okay.
So it was a little disappointing, but
hopefully we come full circle,
Coming back though to teaching at UWI, what I found was the students, the undergrad students, there was like two different groups. There was one group of students that were somewhat poor, they weren't that talented necessarily, and they weren't interested in doing work, like putting in the work. They just wanted to get through the course, get a passing grade in the course.
Okay.
Then there was another group of students who were actually really, really good, and my understanding is that they would have normally applied to the engineering program and then been in Trinidad, but they didn't want to leave Jamaica because they had loved ones, had family.
Yes.
So they decided to stay and not do engineering in Trinidad, but do something else like physics in the Munro campus. I may be interpreting some of this,
sure,
but that was what I saw. And so yeah, these kind of two groups, and so it was frustrating. I tried to help the group that I thought maybe needed more of the help, but again, they didn't necessarily want it. I remember teaching in a class, and I was trying to explain this idea, like this is how you should really think about it if you want to be able to figure out this idea. And someone raised their hand and said, "Sir, is this going to be on the test?" What's going to be on the test? I want to know what's on the test so I can know what answer I need to put so I can pass. And I almost walked out of the classroom, and I was just so discouraged.
Yes.
But then I focused on finding the students who wanted to be there, who wanted to learn, who are interested, and sort of focus my energies on them. And there were a lot. There's talent there. There's one of them who I want to to get her to come on this podcast is she did computer science. Then she went on to a graduate school, I think, in Urbana in Illinois.
Oh, nice.
And then she's worked at LinkedIn, at
Very cool.
And at different startups, and she's a like, very, very successful software engineer in the Valley, in Silicon Valley. And so that's just an example. There are all students who are just like super, super smart and talented, and I enjoyed working with them.
Yeah.
So I would say I'd advise you, if you're not interested in the material, don't study that subject.
Yeah. Move on to
no
something.
one's forcing you. Yeah. Find what you love and do it so that you can really engage and have a good. It's better for you. It's better for the professor.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And so the next stage that I wanted to hop into, you worked at Texas Instruments, and if people hear about Texas Instruments these days, they look at their calculator and like, oh yeah, okay, Texas Instruments, who cares? But can you reshare with us sort of the significance of that company? Because what I understand, Texas Instruments was quite a serious engineering and research company, if I'm not mistaken, and you working there is pretty big deal, right? Back in those days.
Yeah. So the project I was working on, it's called DLP.
DLP.
Yes, and it is a very, very interesting technology. No one else in the world makes a technology like this. It's sort of unique, and it's very, very fascinating. It's a display chip, but on the surface of this display chip, so instead of just silicon, they put some layers on top and have little microscopic pieces that move, that flip back and forth.
What?
And that's how they control the display. Yeah, they're little mirrors.
That's crazy.
Okay, so each mirror is a pixel, and you shine light on it and projects it out onto the screen. And you can create an image this way. And so they sell these chips. They're used in digital cinema projectors. They're used in conference room projectors. In fact, they're the best conference room projectors that you could get. Nowadays, no one uses a conference room projector anymore. They just use a big flat screen. But
yes.
But it's fascinating technology. But they have these quirks. So they're unique. You need to solve these algorithm problems. How do you flip those mirrors in the way to make the image look the best, to get the best, brightest possible?
Mm-hmm. So it's a big synchronization problem.
Big synchronization problem, yes. Because the colors, to get different colors, it turns out that's a synchronization. That's one of the things that requires synchronization. The color that's hitting the chip is changing, red to green to blue. There's a color wheel. In the old days, we used a color wheel that was spinning, and that's how you got different colors by turning the mirrors on at the right time, all that kind of stuff. So very fascinating, very interesting project. I enjoyed working there actually, but I had a couple of things that happened there which impacted me. One was sort of after my first year of working there, I applied for this promotion. It's sort of the tech ladder is what they call it. You become a member of the technical staff. It's a title that you get, and then you can kind of progress over your career. Member, senior member, distinguished member, and so on.
Right.
And they say that, well, after a year, no one gets it after a year. Don't even try. Don't even try. But I thought I would try because I'd done some work. I'd probably file like maybe 5 or 6 patents trying to solve these problems that the company was working on. And I didn't get it. And I was very discouraged. I was crushed. I'd never really dealt with rejection, major rejection in my life up to that point. I mentioned my wife, we're dating in high school. So I'd never had like a big breakup where somebody rejected me. Like I applied to MIT, I got in.
Right.
I applied to this job to teach, I got it. Um,
Even getting to Texas Instruments, you got in there as well.
exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't realize how psychologically that would be, and I didn't, because of that, I didn't do. I would say I stopped putting in an effort at work for about a year.
Wow.
Um, I mean, I'll go to work and do whatever, but my heart wasn't in it like
Yes.
it was before. And so that was a big lesson for me is sort of how to deal with that, to realize that, well, don't take it personally, but also to realize that those things really do affect me, and I need to be a little more careful, a little more cautious. Um, so that was one. You know, I eventually applied the next year and got it.
I see.
The other thing that happened too is that because I learned to try to do what I wanted to do, right? Not necessarily what my boss wanted me to do. So the job that I wanted, that's a job I would do.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to innovate and solve problems, and so I just got the people together who I thought would be interested in that, and said, "Hey, let's meet. Let's meet for breakfast every week, and we'll just come up with like either bring a problem or bring a solution, and we'll just brainstorm and just write things down and just like try to see what we can come up with."
And they're probably watching like, what the hell are you doing? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But then when they realized that, well, they need some new ideas, some new business ideas, because projectors sales are going down, and what are we going to do? They started a team. They call it the White Space team, which was like a small team of like 10 people to try to look at, investigate, well, what else? What are the new ideas that we should be working on? And because I was already doing this, they asked me to be part of the team. So it was
very cool.
That was my lesson is, you know, they say dress for the job you want, not the job you have. I would say just do the job you want, not the job you have.
Yeah, I like that. I like that bad. You moved on from Texas Instruments to a company called, I believe it's called, give me one sec, Syndiant.
Yeah.
Syndiant. And can you tell us about your experience there? I guess Texas Instrument was, as I was saying, you know, a very well-known, renowned company. And then I hadn't necessarily heard of the next company that you moved to. So what was that experience like? And tell us about that.
Yeah, let me tell you how I got there. So there was a recession sort of happening. The economy wasn't doing very well. And like I mentioned, they saw the projector sales going down and they were a little concerned. And just the company in general, DLP was a very small piece of Texas Instruments, was a much bigger company. And so they laid off about 25% of the workforce, including me. I was laid off. I didn't just leave Texas Instruments of my own volition.
So that's a big rejection. That's
a big rejection. The lesson I learned from that is that when you're working for a company, it's business. You know, some people feel bad about, well, I don't want to leave this company that has done, you know, done all these things for me and move somewhere else. Don't worry about that. Listen, the company will fire you as soon as it is in their best interest to do so. Yeah. So don't feel like it's a personal relationship, like loyalty and all this. No, it's a business relationship that you have with your company, and you should view it that way. And so I was out of work for a while. I was there was a recession. It was very difficult to find jobs. And this company, Syndiant, they were like a competitor to DLP. They were making a different kind of display chip.
Okay.
They eventually called me back for a second interview after a while. And I was able to work there. And it was one of the best jobs, I think, of my career. It was a small company.
So you knew everybody, you knew all the players.
Everybody was talented, right? Everybody was good, and the team worked together. I mean, you felt this like we're on the same team. We're doing this together to get to this point, and it was fantastic. Not only that, because they were a small company and they were up against companies like TI and all the display companies, they needed every competitive advantage that they could find. So they needed to innovate. And so I had all these ideas like, oh, let's shrink the memory by adding in some image compression to the pipeline, stuff like that. And at Texas Instruments, I felt like I was coming up with these ideas. Oh, let's do this. And I would go talk to someone and be like, well, we tried that. Well, you're not really going to get that much performance. That seems a little risky. It was different. But at this new company, Sydney, I said, hey, let's do image compression so we can shrink the memory. They were like, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And and now I had to like fulfill on the promise of how to come up with the algorithm to make it happen, and I exactly laid out. And so I did that, and we were able to really produce some of the best LCOS displays. LCOS is what they were called. And it was I was there for, I want to say 4 years. It was good. It was very, very good.
That's amazing. And I think that's a good maybe startup lesson to some degree as well, right? Where you come in as an expert and it's a smaller team, the players, and in order to survive, you have to innovate.
Yes. The downside with a startup, of course, is that they didn't have any money.
Right.
Okay. And so every like 2 or 3 months, they were running out of money and they had to go raise money. Or the investors had to like float them more money, stuff like that. So it was a little bit.
It's a harder environment to innovate for sure, right?
Yeah. And there was all this uncertainty of, well, am I going to have a job, next month?
Yeah. Different type of stress.
Different type of stress. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was okay with that kind of risk, I think, because at the time, it was just me and my wife. No big deal. If I lost my job, I think I just try to find a new one, whatever. But the reason I really ended up leaving Syndiant is we wanted to adopt some kids.
Okay.
We had met the kids. We kind of fell in love with them. The 2 kids wanted to adopt them. And because of how adoption process works, like for a year, you can't change jobs or anything. You can't move. Because, they start off with
stability.
Yeah. They start off with what's called the home visit. They come and check out your home and check out your job situation. And then they begin this year-long process of paperwork, eventually get the kids at the end. But if at any point you change jobs or you move, they have to start over from scratch, so. So being in a startup that was running out of money every few months wasn't ideal. And that's when I happened to get a call from a Google recruiter. Again, this is sort of my life. Looking back at my life, I see all these coincidences of timing that line up to get me to where I am. And, I personally believe in sort of divine providence and that a greater hand at work. But in any case, it just seems remarkable to me to have all these things line up. One of them was that call from the Google recruiter right when we're considering adopting. Similarly, when I was about to fly over to Google to do the interview, I messaged a friend of mine who had a startup, who worked at Texas Instruments with me, who had a startup, and the startup was in Silicon Valley. And I was like, hey, I want to put you as a reference to my Google application. And he says, oh, that's very interesting that you're applying to Google. Turns out my startup company, this is still secret, but my startup company is in the process of being acquired by Google.
Oh, no way.
So he was able to get into Google that way. He was able to give me an internal reference and write up some recommendations because of we worked on. He was one of the ones who came to those breakfast sessions that we had, these brainstorming meetings. He's a smart guy, still at Google, still at sort of top of his game. And again, seems like more than a coincidence, but
but you had done the work many years before by just taking a chance and bringing people together, trying to innovate without permission. And,
Yeah,
those things, they paid off,
they paid
even
off.
by divine providence still
Yeah,
organizing things.
yeah,
You got that opportunity. That's cool.
yeah. So
So tell us about your time at Google, right? I think, at least in my own journey during my PhD, Google was something that was top of my mind. I put this thing, all right, I'm going to get into Google by X date, and naturally you fall off that cliff and didn't necessarily hit that goal. But even now that I'm at Nvidia, even one of my interview experiences, I saw someone, they were like, yeah, we only take the best. And I kind of walked up to the guy and said, hey, I'm not there right now. I will see you one day. And when I got into Nvidia, I called him and said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. And he actually did, which was kind of cool. So just sort of echoing that story about, getting to maybe some of these top companies. Granted, they're not the end all be all of the world, but it is kind of cool to at least get your work measured at that level. So tell us about that experience at Google.
yeah, Google was a lot of fun. When we're at Texas Instruments and that team that white space team, I remember one of the meetings the guy in charge printed out a list of like how Google innovates, and we're like, hey, we've got to follow this, and we're like, okay, yeah, we're trying to think like Google, how to think like Google. So it's funny that both me and the guy whose company was acquired by Google were in the room at the time, and we ended up working at Google. But yeah, Google definitely they had some shifts, some paradigm shifting ideas. And it was fun to see. The thing that impressed me most about Google was just how much money they had.
Yeah.
Coming from a startup where I needed a new laptop, and I had to convince someone to be like, hey, well, why don't you use the secondhand laptop that no one's using? Whereas at Google, man, they bought me a laptop, they bought me a desktop, they bought me a desktop for my home, they got me like a phone. It just everywhere I look, I see like these huge color printers of like laserjet printers, and like you just grab equipment off the shelf if you need like something, and the food was all free, and the drinks were all free, the coffee was all free, and the gym was free, and the laundry, you could do laundry for free, and they provided shuttles. I mean, it was mind blowing that they have so much money, but they really try to spend the money on making the employees' lives easier, better, so that they can kind of keep them productive. And yeah, it was good. It was good. I worked on a couple of projects early on in a compression team, and then one of the guys there was leaving to start this AR VR team. He knew I was very interested because we had done some talking about 3D displays. In fact, I'd put together a document. Like I mentioned, do the job you want.
Yes.
So I didn't really want this video compression job. I was just doing it. But on the side, I was like finding out who's interested in 3D displays and in VR. And I wrote a document and shared it with a bunch of people that they could edit. And it was like, how do you create like a 3D holographic display? I kind of highlighted like step by step on how you'd want to get there. And the document got out of hand. Too many people were eventually added, and they were all contributing, and they all had different ideas of how to get there. And so I abandoned that eventually. But because of that, someone identified me and said, hey, why don't you come join us in this AR VR team?
That's so cool.
I joined that team. I was there for 4 years. Most of the team was working on VR in terms of headsets, VR headsets that you'd put on. But again, by a number of coincidences and things lining up, stars aligning, me and two other guys decided we were going to make not a 3D display you wear on your head, but a 3D display that sits on a desk and looks like a TV. And we were going to use it to do kind of what we're doing here, sort of video conferencing, right? So I'm looking at you now, but I see you like a little picture of you on my computer screen. And we said, well, we could combine these technologies to make a system where instead of seeing a picture of someone in a screen, you see them there in 3D in front of you, like
you see the depth and you see.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Like you're having dinner together and I'm eating here, someone's at our side table, you see them there. And that journey to get that project built and done was too much details to get into now. But if you Google it, Google Project Starline, and you'll see sort of what that turned into. And it was very, very interesting. All the pieces that had to come together to make that. I was sort of in charge of the display, this 3D holographic display. And in fact, the videos you see showing it don't really do it justice because you're just watching a video of it. It's
right.
Totally different from seeing it in real life. So, but anyway,
great.
It was interesting. Google was the sort of best of both worlds in that it was like a startup. They needed the innovation. They were excited about ideas. They wanted to turn those ideas into real things. But at the same time, they had very deep pockets. So you had great people doing good ideas that were costing a lot of money to work on these things. But Google was willing to just foot the bill sort of indefinitely because they were like printing money at Google. And I don't know how they managed to do that, but
yeah, I don't think that's the case anymore. I think they've gotten a lot more strict. I've heard the CFO is, cracking whips on them. So based on that project, that's natural to think why Magic Leap essentially wanted to poach you, or you probably got interested in Magic Leap as well, being in AR VR world.
Yes. So how I ended up at Magic Leap again. It was one of those things of the stars aligning. What happened was, so I was working at Google. The team was growing now. It was like 15 people. This project was, I was beginning to have differences. Different people had sort of different ideas of how to get the project move forward. And, it was fine. It was fine. I would have loved to continue working on a project at Google. But we're considering, hey, let me apply outside of Google and maybe I can at least use a job offer to negotiate a better salary or something. So I applied to Magic Leap. It's a great company. At the time, they hadn't released their product yet. So a lot of people thought it was kind of fake or like a scam. And so I wanted to see myself. So I was like, hey, apply here. Maybe I can go get a demo, at least as part of the job interview, which I did. They gave me a demo as part of the job interview. I was like,
oh,
whoa,
wow.
Okay, I thought this was not real. Now when I see the demo, I can see they're really doing some amazing stuff. And then the day that I got an offer from Magic Leap, I also found out that my wife was expecting a baby. So this was somewhat unexpected news, and Magic Leap was located in Florida. Okay, we're from Jamaica. One of the difficulties with living in California, it was just so far. Okay,
time zone
is a big deal. You just you don't call people as much because when they're having dinner, you're still at work. When you're having dinner, they're asleep. Travel too. Getting my parents to come visit us over there in California was hard for them to fly so far. And I have cousins and so on who I would love to see more often. And flying to Jamaica was a whole ordeal.
Yeah.
And so when we knew that a baby was coming, we knew that we wanted to live closer to Jamaica. And because this offer from Magic Leap was in Florida, we decided to take it and move to Florida. So that's kind of how that happened. And turns out Florida is great. Florida, the proximity to Jamaica has been great. The 2 years I was living here before the pandemic, I flew down to Jamaica several times. My parents flew up several times. the Caribbean food here is great. There's just like so many Caribbean folks who live here in Florida. You know, real roti. You can get real roti here.
Yeah, it's like you're not far from home at all, right?
Yeah, not far from home. Yeah.
And no taxes is that helps a lot on your salary. So
Yeah, no state income tax in Florida. That is true. And just the cost of living is way less than California.
Mhm.
Bay Area is just crazy. So
Great. So you know you had a good time at Magic Leap, and then I think Nvidia saw how much career capital you had accumulated, and you kind of shared with us um, sort of how you had felt about Nvidia at the beginning. But tell us what has your journey been like so far at Nvidia, and yeah, what lessons would you think you can take away from that for people to
yes.
know?
One of the reasons I think Nvidia worked out is this is somewhat strange, but because of the pandemic. Okay, the pandemic happened, um, and everybody started to work remotely, and so Nvidia was able to offer me, say, "Hey, you can keep living in Florida." Um, and I don't think they would have necessarily done that, although they were a little bit more of a remote company anyway before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, pandemic sealed the deal. Like, of course, yeah, of course, you can just work in Florida. Whereas when I was talking to Apple and interviewed with Apple, like I had mentioned, and they were like, okay, if you want to live in Florida, you got to fly here
Every
um,
so often, and
1 week out of every month or something like that, and um, or you got to move at least up to Orlando, where there's an Apple office in Orlando, things like that. And so it's kind of one of the perks, not perks, perks is the wrong word. One of the benefits of the pandemic um, is that it's allowed some of this freedom, especially in my situation. So
yes.
But the thing that impresses me about Nvidia is they're really strategic. The CEO Jensen uh, is. It seems like he is doing too much. Like it's almost like that movie. Remember that movie where there were this magician, but it's really twins, and there's two of him.
Oh yeah, and I think like he would magically like die or something, and then he would pop up, but it was really
Exactly.
two of them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was twins, right? Yeah, yeah. And nobody knew, not even his wife. Like, he kept it a secret from his wife. So his wife was like, "How come sometimes we have such a good relationship, and then like sometimes for weeks on end we can't get along?" And
Mm-hmm.
but he had to really keep it secret to make the
trick work. Yeah.
work. Yeah, he didn't tell anybody. I feel like Jensen must be like that because he's doing so much. He's involved in every aspect of the company. He's helping make decisions down to like some of the details. Like I mentioned, he called me up when I was considering coming here.
That's crazy.
Where does he find time to do that kind of thing? So it's unbelievable to kind of see him work, see the way he thinks. He just like everything he predicts, I think, is like has actually happened, and he's done a really really good job of just understanding technology, understanding the capabilities, understanding where tech is going and getting in front of it. Being able to provide compute, the future of compute is all Nvidia is going to be the key provider there. So
yeah, I didn't think a lot about compute before I got to Nvidia, and now that I'm here, you can actually see why it makes so much sense. To the way that they're architecting data centers versus sort of how it exists now. It will be quite a big game changer.
Yeah, exactly. And the future, the demand for compute is only going to go up in the future. So
yes,
we're going to need more cloud compute, more cloud storage, more. All that's we need more of it. And Nvidia is going to be the primary provider of all that. So it's good. I didn't realize Nvidia had such a strong software and algorithm and research piece either before I joined. So it's really great to work with some of the top talent. Google is very strong in software. That's everybody knows that. But
Yeah.
their hardware piece is a little bit they're not so great. They're trying to kind of boost up their hardware. They have a hardware org now, and they're trying to make phones and make Google Home and stuff. And so you gotta give them props that they're trying to improve. But internally, their systems are not set up to like reward hardware engineers.
Interesting.
It's all like their perf, which is their annual review process, is all set up to reward software engineers who release things and who make these contributions to the code base. And if you're a hardware engineer who maybe it takes 12 months from you design a chip to when a chip comes in, how do you even put that in?
How do you quantify that your contribution?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So well, Magic Leap I thought had a better balance between hardware and software. But Nvidia really is, I think, really good in terms of that balance, right? They're making hardware, they're making chips, they know what's needed to make that happen, the kind of rigor and attention to detail, and even just financially, making sure you don't spend too much money. You try things out, you prove things out, validate them before you spend the money, all that kind of stuff that Google is still sort of learning. They're good at that, but then they have these amazing software teams as well. The Omniverse team, doing some really, really cool software. Drive sim, robotics.
Robotics is a big one.
Autonomous vehicles, everything. So I'm impressed. I'm still even. Also, I was going to mention G-Sync monitors. They make reference designs for monitors. So I'm a display guy. I was able to find a couple of people who are into displays and talk to them. I was able to find people who are into robotics and talk to them. I was able to find people who are into AR, VR and talk to them.
So there's all these sub pockets within the company that you're able to sort of interact with, right?
Yeah. And they are doing very well financially, sort of maybe better than anyone would have expected. They kind of stumbled into like cryptocurrency mining. I think was good for them. That kind of the pandemic has sort of been good financially. More people are at home. More people are like, well, instead of spending money going out, let me spend a little extra money on this GPU so I can have a good gaming experience at home and at least pretend I'm
somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere. Exactly. Yeah.
Great. So in the last segment of the podcast, now that you've kind of given us a very deep dive on your career and I've pulled out some lessons from it, what advice would you give around, let's say, cultivating passion? You did mention, hey, you should kind of go do something that you're pretty interested in and to some degree get paid well. But what advice would you give someone to maybe try to find that, be it early in their career or even maybe later stage career? You might have had to just go with this career just to survive, to get to a place where you can now start to explore. So any thoughts there?
Generally speaking, I think people will pay you if you do something well.
Okay.
And I think you'll do something well if you do something you love. Now, what do you say to someone who says, I don't know if I love to do anything? That can't be true. There must be something that you really love to do. If you love to read books even, you can get into that. You can write book reviews, you can read books, you can become an editor, you can write books. If you love reading books, maybe you can use that to be able to become an author. So I think you should explore early on when you're in kind of high school, even college, explore, but find those things that you love and dive into them. You can become the best in the world. There's something that you can become the best in the world at. Um, so find what it is and do it.
And go for it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So last three questions. What two pieces of advice? And you said, in my opinion, a lot of advice throughout, which hopefully we were able to pull out or you remembered. So what two pieces of advice would you give to a high schooler, a person in college, or even one piece of advice to a person in high school, college, and a professional?
In high school, I would say try to get involved in a bunch of things outside of academics, sports, music, the arts. So go broad, I would say, in high school.
Yes.
And ignore, the second piece of advice would be to ignore there's a strong sort of popularity competition in high school. People, you can tend to spend a lot of energy on that, or a lot of emotional energy when you get left out of that. Just ignore that. That's irrelevant. That doesn't come into play
later on in life.
Yeah. Okay. Now to college. A few pieces of advice if you're a college student. And these are easy. These are things that you can do. Anybody can do. These are not difficult. But you're going to hear this advice and you're going to think it's too simple. That it can't be that easy. One, attend all your lectures. Sit at the front of the classroom.
Okay.
In the first row if possible.
Yes.
And whenever the professor asks a question to the class, raise your hand and attempt to give an answer.
Even if it's the wrong one.
Even if it's the wrong one. You might look like a fool, but the professor will remember you. And eventually it'll force you to have to listen so that you won't sound stupid. Yeah, you won't embarrass yourself. Do the homework on the day it's assigned, not on the day before it's due.
Okay, that's a big one. Someone should have been beating me to head on my head with a stick with that one.
Yeah, and attend the office hours that your professor has. All of them will have an office hours. Attend it. Go to it. Find out when it is. Go to it. Ask some questions, or even just introduce yourself.
Yes.
Or even just sit there and listen in on some other people's questions. Just do those things. And and don't be afraid. You'll probably end up changing majors at some point. That's okay.
Yeah. And then for professional. Let me hear you.
Professional. Okay. Well, one of them is certainly do the job you want.
Yeah, I really like that one. Even if you don't get paid for it, right?
Even if you don't get paid for it. If you're in tech, also, I would say you should be interviewing for a new job at least once every 2 years or maybe once a year.
Okay. Even if it's the first year in your job?
Even if it's the first year.
All right. Okay.
You've been there for a year. Just go on an interview. Even if you plan to turn down an offer. In fact, the more offers you turn down is the higher paying your field will be.
Okay.
The people will be like, oh man,
I have to get that guy.
And and I think this is one of the reasons why on the business side people get paid a little bit more than on the engineering side.
Interesting. I'll keep that one for sure.
Yes, and read a couple of books. Read a book on negotiation. Like there's one called "Never Split the Difference." Figure out how to negotiate and negotiate salaries, and be open to changing jobs and careers. Fairly often, like every 2 to 3 years. I mean, you don't have to, but be open to it.
Absolutely.
And learn new stuff. just because you've been doing something for 5 years doesn't mean you got to do it for the next 5 years. You can pick up,
do something completely new.
Yeah,
and go.
Yeah.
I appreciate you calling those out. The last two questions I have. The first one is, how do you think your Caribbean heritage has contributed to your success during your career? That's a big thing we try to highlight in the show. Any thoughts there?
Yes, certainly the school, that rigor in school, I think helped me. Even though I said that it didn't fit my personality, I think it still was good to have sort of a schooling that was discipline oriented.
Yes.
Also, I'll touch on this. This could be a whole, a whole nother podcast. But the idea of race, growing up in the Caribbean, you see people of different races. Everybody's mixed. I myself am mixed, multiple races, and you don't necessarily have the same biases, classifications, even classifications for yourself. And for example, growing up in Jamaica, I certainly saw people in leadership who are Black. The police force, most of them are Black. I mean, successful people are Black. It's not uncommon. Whereas in America, because of what's been going on for years, things are still not maybe where they should be. And so if you're Black growing up in America, you didn't see the same things. You didn't see leaders who look like you, and it can have a detrimental effect. So I think a Caribbean person has a little bit of an advantage in that they know that it's okay. I mean, they don't limit themselves necessarily. And also they weren't deprived in the same way, right? They had opportunities which maybe someone who was African American growing up here just didn't have. Anyway, that's a whole nother.
Yeah, that's a good thing to call out there. And I'm sure if anyone has American friends and Caribbean friends, you get to see a distinct difference sort of in behavior and outlook sometimes.
Yeah,
that's very apparent. Great. And my last, I guess I forgot a question, but if you can summarize, what are 3 principles you live by? I've really enjoyed listening to your career journey and how you've put certain things forward. But if you want to summarize it in 3 bullets.
Ooh, I should have maybe given this some thought to be able to pull out bullets. One is that basically everything in life I learned from playing poker.
What? Okay, I didn't see that coming, but
yeah,
I'm listening.
Poker, it has sort of changed my perspective. Everything in life to me is a game. There's a game. When I'm talking to my wife about what we should do, how we should parent the kids and so on, or we have to figure something out where we should go. It's a game. It's a negotiation, and that's not a bad thing. And there's game theory elements that come into play, like, well, you got to give a little bit here, you got to demand something here, you got to what you tolerate, what you don't tolerate, and so that's one of the things I live by. Everything is a game, and I become a student of the game, so to speak. And yeah, read up in your spare time. Read up on some game theory and the results there. Let's see. Next one is I think I have to put sort of a spiritual,
absolutely,
a high priority. Why is that? Because if that's not there, I don't think the rest of life is, for me, it's not worth living. It's not worth playing the game unless there's some some goal, some higher calling, something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the things I live by. And then the other one, I would say it's feelings. Understand, try to learn, study and learn emotions and try to understand them, because those are the things that will motivate you. That I mean, if you can control your own emotions, you can sort of do anything.
Yeah.
And so if you can understand emotions and how those work, it's sort of difficult for engineer, I think, because engineering, you don't necessarily, you aren't taught this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you can figure it out. I mean,
you're an engineer, right?
Yeah, you can engineer. Yeah, you just kind of reverse engineer the system.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that's it.
Great. Those are three pretty cool ones. The poker one I didn't see coming at all. And my last question: what 3 books would you recommend people to read?
Oh, yes, I should have definitely prepared this. But one of them I already mentioned, Never Split the Difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Have that one right on the shelf behind me there. So
yes. There's another one. It's, I think, The Beginning of Infinity.
Oh. Is that a math book?
Beginning of Infinity. No. And maybe if I need to search up these authors and stuff, you can put.
Sure, no, but I could find them and put them in the notes.
Yeah. And then. The Innovator's Dilemma.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Innovator's Dilemma. Never heard of that one. I'm going to find that one for sure. But once again, Andrew, I appreciate it. I've enjoyed listening to your career journey. I've put some things in my back pocket and probably need to go start studying to get in, ready to interview at some point. And, appreciate your time today and thanks for all the lessons. Yeah, thanks, Mark. This was super exciting. It was a pleasure to be able to share. Love what you're doing with the podcast. Keep it up. Doing great work. So, and I'm gonna send some of my friends your way. Much appreciated. Some more Jamaicans on here.